All right, so get this. You guys sent us tons and tons of stuff about the Illuminati, but specifically about how they're supposedly like running Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's really interesting because like on the surface it sounds totally bonkers, right?
Yeah.
But when you actually dig into it,
Right.
it kind of reveals a lot about how
Yeah.
people see power
Mm.
and fame
Right.
and kind of how we explain stuff that happens in the world.
I think it's like everybody's always looking for the puppet master, right? Especially with something like Hollywood, which has such a huge impact on global culture. I mean,
Totally. And we've got a really interesting mix of sources for this one.
mm.
We've got everything from like news articles and stuff from online forums
Yeah.
where people are like debating this stuff
Mm-hmm.
to actual historical analysis.
Well,
So
yeah.
we're going to try and do a deep dive into all of it.
Great.
But before we go too far down any rabbit holes, let's rewind a little bit.
Mhm.
And who are the actual Illuminati? Not like the ones that are supposedly behind every celebrity's Instagram post.
Yeah, so the original Bavarian Illuminati were kind of a far cry from this, like,
Yeah.
all-powerful image they've kind of been morphed into through the conspiracy theories. They were founded in 1776 by a German professor named Adam Weishaupt. And believe it or not, they're basically just about promoting Enlightenment ideals.
Enlightenment ideals. So like, were they more about like, book clubs and philosophy
Yeah,
than actual world domination?
pretty much, yeah. They were all about reason and secularism and, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
They're actually a pretty small group, too. Maybe like a couple hundred members at most.
Oh.
And they were only around for about a decade before they got shut down.
Oh, wow.
So the irony is they were ambitious, but they were nowhere near as powerful or as long-lasting as these. Conspiracy theories make them out to be.
Okay, so they were kind of like a flash in the pan then, just a short-lived group of intellectuals, not exactly the global cabal we hear about today. So how did they become so synonymous with pulling the strings in Hollywood? Like, how did those two worlds collide?
Well, that's where things get interesting. You see the Illuminati, even though they didn't last very long, they were really good at using symbols and secrecy, which actually kind of backfired on them because it just fueled their mythical reputation. I mean, they even used secret identities and infiltrated Freemason lodges as part of their recruitment efforts.
Wait, Freemasons. For those of us who haven't really brushed up on our secret society history, can you give us like a quick rundown of who the Freemasons are?
Sure, the Freemasons are like a much older fraternal organization. They're known for their rituals and their emphasis on like morality and brotherhood. There's no inherent link to global conspiracies or anything like that. But the fact that the Illuminati tried to recruit from within their ranks definitely added to that air of mystery surrounding them.
So even back then, people were afraid of these secret societies operating behind the scenes. But how did we go from 18th century Bavaria to 21st century Hollywood?
Well, I think that fascination with secret societies never really went away. It kind of just morphed and adapted over time. And the Illuminati became this like blank slate onto which people could project their own anxieties about power and control. And in the 20th century, Hollywood, with its massive cultural influence and, all the wealth and larger-than-life personalities, it became like the perfect target for these kinds of theories.
Okay, so I see how the narrative starts to shift. So we've got this historical backdrop of the real Illuminati. Then we have this kind of persistent fear of secret societies.
Right.
And then Hollywood emerges as this like cultural powerhouse. Was there a specific event or moment that really cemented this whole like Illuminati running Hollywood idea in the public imagination?
Not really one single event. It was more like a bunch of different factors all converging at the same time. You had the rise of mass media, particularly like television and film, which gave Hollywood this unprecedented reach into people's lives. Right. And then you had the counterculture movements of the 60s and 70s, questioning authority and fueling this kind of distrust in institutions.
Yeah.
So those trends created really fertile ground for conspiracy theories to flourish.
So it's like the perfect storm, right?
Yeah.
And then comes the internet.
Mm.
And social media just throws gasoline on the fire.
Exactly. The internet, especially social media, totally changed the game because suddenly anyone could publish their theories and share quote-unquote evidence and find a community that reinforces those beliefs.
It's like the echo chamber effect,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You only see information that confirms what you already believe.
Exactly.
But you mentioned evidence.
Yeah.
What kind of proof do people usually point to?
Well, this is where all those symbols we were talking about earlier come in. The Illuminati, even the real ones, were obsessed with symbolism. And that fascination is kind of carried over into the conspiracy theories. You see it everywhere. The all-seeing eye, pyramids, even certain hand gestures.
Yeah, I've seen those symbols all over the internet, usually with some dramatic music playing in the background. But aren't a lot of those symbols way older than the Illuminati themselves?
Absolutely. The all-seeing eye, for example, has roots in ancient Egypt. And it's been used in all sorts of contexts throughout history. But in the context of these theories, they get stripped of their original meaning and become this kind of shorthand for Illuminati control.
So it's like people are looking for patterns, looking for some kind of secret code that explains how the world works. And those symbols become like the key to unlocking that code.
Yeah, it's a way of creating order out of chaos. And in a world that often feels random and unpredictable, that can be really appealing.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all the pieces fit together here. You've got the historical context, the rise of Hollywood, the power of the internet, and this fascination with symbols. But there's one piece of the puzzle I'm still missing. Why Hollywood? Why not Wall Street or Washington, D.C.? What is it about the entertainment industry that makes it such a target for these theories?
That's a great question. And I think it comes down to a few things. First, Hollywood is all about fantasy and illusion. It's literally in the business of creating worlds and telling stories. So it's easy to see how people could start to believe that those stories are being used to manipulate or control us.
So it plays into that inherent distrust of media and storytelling.
Exactly. And second, Hollywood is aspirational. It represents fame and fortune and success, things that lots of people desire, but very few actually achieve.
Right.
So that can create a sense of envy or resentment, which can easily be channeled into suspicion and paranoia.
It's like saying if they're so successful, they must made a deal with the devil. Or in this case, the Illuminati.
Right. And third, Hollywood is notoriously secretive. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that the public never sees.
Yeah.
And that air of mystery creates fertile ground for speculation and conspiracy theories to take root.
I feel like Hollywood is this giant Rorschach test. People project their own fears and anxieties onto it, and they see what they want to see.
Yeah.
You know what always gets me about these theories? It's not just the symbols, it's the supposed, like, subliminal messages hidden in movies and music. Like they're trying to brainwash us with satanic lyrics played backwards or something. It all seems so far-fetched.
But remember what we were talking about earlier, that human desire for patterns and meaning? We're kind of hardwired to look for hidden connections, even where they don't exist.
So even if a musician or a director isn't intentionally putting these messages in their work, some people will find them anyway because they're already looking for them.
Yeah.
It's like confirmation bias in action.
Exactly. And the internet just amplifies that. I mean, you can find all sorts of analysis videos online, breaking down movie scenes frame by frame, pointing out hidden symbols and messages that are often just coincidences.
Yeah.
Or things taken totally out of context.
It's like that whole Paul is dead thing with the Beatles. People were convinced that Paul McCartney had died and been replaced by a look-alike. And they would point to all these clues in the album covers and the lyrics, but it was all just a bunch of nonsense.
It's the same principle at work, though. It's about taking something familiar and reinterpreting it through this lens of conspiracy. But what's really interesting is how these interpretations can vary so much depending on who's doing the interpreting.
What do you mean?
Well, some people see these subliminal messages as evidence of some sinister agenda, like the Illuminati are trying to control our minds, make us more materialistic, or turn us against traditional values. Others see it as a form of rebellion, like these artists are using their platform to expose the truth about the Illuminati or to like wake people up to their manipulation.
Oh, so it's not just one monolithic theory. There are all these different interpretations and even like internal disagreements within the conspiracy community itself.
Absolutely. It's a complex and constantly evolving ecosystem of beliefs, which makes it even harder to debunk. Because there's always another layer, another interpretation, another piece of evidence to latch onto.
Okay, so we've got the symbols, the subliminal messages, this whole idea that the Illuminati are using Hollywood to manipulate us. But what's the end game? What are they actually trying to achieve?
Well, that's where things get really murky. There's no single universally accepted answer. But some common themes do emerge. Some theories suggest they're trying to establish a new world order, like a one-world government controlled by a select elite. Others claim they're trying to usher in an age of spiritual enlightenment, but one that's based on occult practices and the worship of ancient deities.
That sounds a bit more like science fiction than reality.
Right.
But then again, reality is often stranger than fiction.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes these theories so compelling. They tap into our fascination with the unknown, with the possibility that there's something more going on beneath the surface of everyday life.
It's like that scene in The Matrix, where Morpheus offers Neo the red pill or the blue pill. Do you want to see the truth? even if it's disturbing? Or do you want to stay in blissful ignorance?
Exactly. And for a lot of people, the allure of that red pill, the promise of uncovering hidden truths, is just too strong to resist.
But isn't there a danger in going down that rabbit hole? What happens when you start seeing conspiracies everywhere? Doesn't that make it hard to trust anything or anyone?
That's the real danger of conspiracy thinking. It can erode trust in institutions, in experts, even in each other. It can create a climate of fear and paranoia, where everyone is suspect, and every event is seen as part of some grand scheme.
So while it might be tempting to get caught up in the excitement of uncovering these hidden truths, we need to be careful not to lose sight of reality and the importance of critical thinking.
Absolutely, because while these theories can be entertaining, they can also be really harmful.
Okay, so we've talked about the symbols, the messages, the supposed goals of this Hollywood Illuminati. But there's one thing I still don't get. They always seem to target the same celebrities. Jay-Z, Beyonce, Kanye West. It's like a who's who of the music industry. Why those particular artists?
That's a great observation. And I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about Hollywood being so aspirational. These are the artists who have achieved the highest levels of success and fame and wealth. They're the ones who seem to have it all.
So they become symbols themselves. Symbols of everything that people desire, but can't attain.
Exactly. And that makes them really easy targets for suspicion. It's like saying their success is so extraordinary, it can't possibly be explained by talent or hard work alone. There must be something else going on.
It's like the inverse of the American dream. Instead of believing that anyone can achieve success through hard work and determination, it's saying that extraordinary success is only possible through some nefarious means.
Right, and that can be a really dangerous message, especially for young people who are already bombarded with images of unattainable perfection.
Yeah, it creates this sense of hopelessness, like the game is rigged, and there's no point in even trying.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to challenge these theories, to point out the logical fallacies, the lack of evidence, and the harmful consequences of believing them.
So it's not just about debunking a silly theory, it's about protecting a more positive and empowering worldview.
Absolutely. It's about reminding people that success is possible, that talent and hard work do matter, and that we don't have to resort to conspiracy theories to explain the complexities of the world around us.
Okay, I'm with you on that. But I have to admit, there's still a part of me that finds these theories kind of intriguing. It's like a guilty pleasure, like watching a good horror movie. You know it's not real, but you still get caught up in the suspense.
Oh, I totally get that. There's definitely a certain allure to the mystery, to the idea that we're not being told the whole story. And let's be honest, some of these theories are pretty creative and entertaining.
Right. It's like a puzzle trying to figure out the hidden connections and decode the secret messages.
But I think it's important to maintain a healthy level of skepticism, to remember that these are just theories, not facts, and that there's a big difference between being curious about these ideas and actually believing them.
So how do we strike that balance? How do we stay curious without falling down the rabbit hole?
I think it's about being aware of our own biases, questioning our assumptions, and always looking for evidence to either support or refute our beliefs. It's also about being willing to change our minds when we're presented with new information.
So it's not about shutting down curiosity. It's about channeling it in a more critical and constructive direction.
Exactly. And recognizing that there are more productive and empowering ways to make sense of the world around us.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about the appeal of these theories, the dangers they pose, and the importance of critical thinking. But I'm wondering, is there like a deeper psychological reason why people are drawn to these kinds of narratives? What is it about the human psyche that makes us so susceptible to conspiracy thinking?
That's a great question. And it's one that psychologists and sociologists have been trying to figure out for decades. There are a few key theories that keep coming up. One is that conspiracy theories offer a sense of control in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
So if you believe that there's like a secret group pulling the strings, it's less scary than believing that things just happen randomly.
Exactly. It gives you a sense of agency, even if that agency is based on a false premise.
It's like saying, okay, the world might be messed up, but at least someone's in charge.
Right. Another theory is that conspiracy theories appeal to our desire for meaning and purpose. They offer a way to make sense of complex events and to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
So instead of feeling like a passive observer, you become an active participant in uncovering the truth.
Exactly. And it gives you a sense of belonging, a community of like-minded individuals who share your beliefs. and validate your worldview.
It's like a secret club. Only in this case, the initiation ritual
Hmm.
is believing in a conspiracy theory.
Right. And that sense of belonging can be really powerful, especially for people who feel alienated or marginalized by mainstream society.
So it's not just about the theory itself, it's about the social and emotional needs that it fulfills.
Exactly. And that's why it's so difficult to counter these beliefs. With logic and reason alone, you have to address the underlying psychological needs as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm wondering, if these theories are so deeply rooted in our psychology, is there any hope of combating them? Or are we just doomed to be ruled by paranoia and suspicion?
I don't think we're doomed at all. But I do think it requires a multifaceted approach. We need to address the root causes of these beliefs,
Hmm.
the social and economic inequalities, the erosion of trust in institutions, the information overload that makes it so hard to discern truth from falsehood.
So it's not just about debunking individual theories, it's about creating a more just and equitable society where people feel less need to resort to conspiracy thinking.
Exactly. And it's also about promoting critical thinking skills,
Yeah.
media literacy, and healthy skepticism.
So basically teaching people how to be more discerning consumers of information and to think for themselves.
Right. And it's about creating spaces for open and honest dialogue, where people can share their beliefs, challenge each other's perspectives, and learn to see things from different points of view.
So it's not about silencing those who believe in conspiracy theories. It's about engaging with them in a respectful and constructive way.
Exactly. Because ultimately, we're all in this together. And the only way to combat these divisive narratives is to build bridges of understanding and to foster a more informed and compassionate public discourse.
Well said. After all this talk about the Illuminati and Hollywood, I'm starting to feel a little paranoid myself. I'm looking at those potted plants over there, wondering if they're secretly listening devices.
I think that's a good sign that you're engaging with the material.
Uh-huh, perhaps. But seriously, this has been a really eye-opening conversation. It's made me realize how easy it is to get caught up in these theories, even if you think you're immune to them.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that we all have biases, that we're all susceptible to misinformation, and that we need to be vigilant in our pursuit of truth.
Okay, so we've talked about the psychology of belief, the dangers of conspiracy thinking, and the importance of critical thinking. But there's one specific element of the Hollywood Illuminati theory that we haven't really addressed yet, and it's one that often comes up in discussions about this topic, the Freemason connection.
Ah, yes, the Freemasons. They're practically synonymous with secret societies in the public imagination.
Exactly. And as we mentioned earlier, there is a historical link between the Illuminati and the Freemasons. The Illuminati did infiltrate Freemason lodges in the late 18th century
Right.
as part of their recruitment efforts.
Right. But it's important to understand that the two groups are distinct. The Freemasons are a much older and larger organization with their own history and traditions and beliefs.
So while there might be some overlap in membership and symbolism, they're not one and the same.
Exactly. And to be clear, the Freemasons have consistently denied any connection to the Illuminati or any other conspiratorial activities.
But the fact that the Illuminati did infiltrate them even briefly has fueled a lot of the suspicion and speculation that surrounds both groups.
Absolutely. And it's a good example of how historical events can be twisted and misinterpreted to fit a particular narrative.
And that brings us back to one of our main points, the importance of critical thinking and historical context when we're evaluating these theories.
Precisely. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement and the intrigue of a good conspiracy theory, but we need to remember that they're often based on really flimsy evidence, selective interpretations, and a whole lot of speculation.
So the next time you come across a claim about the Hollywood Illuminati, or any other conspiracy theory for that matter, take a step back, examine the evidence, consider the source, and ask yourself, does this really make sense?
And if it seems too good to be true,
Yeah.
it probably is.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about the Freemasons, the importance of critical thinking. Anything else we need to cover before we move on to the outro?
Well, there's one more piece of quote-unquote evidence that often comes up in discussions about the Illuminati, and it's something that most people have probably seen without even realizing it. The Eye of Providence on the back of the US dollar bill.
Oh yeah, the all-seeing eye in the pyramid.
Yeah.
That's a classic Illuminati symbol, right?
Well, that's what a lot of people believe, but the truth is, the Eye of Providence has a much older and more complex history than the Illuminati.
So what's the real story behind the eye on the dollar bill?
There are a few different interpretations. Some believe it's a Masonic symbol, representing the watchful eye of God.
Hmm.
Others see it as a purely secular symbol, representing the guiding principles of the newly formed nation.
Okay.
And of course, some see it as a sign of the Illuminati's hidden hand in American affairs.
Right.
But the important thing to remember is that the eye on the dollar bill predates the founding of the Bavarian Illuminati by several years.
So it's impossible for it to be a symbol of their influence.
Precisely. And this is a perfect example of how easily symbols can be misinterpreted and co-opted to fit a particular narrative.
It's a reminder that we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions based on superficial resemblances.
Exactly. Just because something looks like an Illuminati symbol doesn't mean it actually is.
Well said. Okay, so we've debunked the dollar bill myth. We've talked about the Freemason connection, the importance of critical thinking. Anything else we need to cover before we move on to the outro?
There's one more piece of pop culture we should touch on that's had a pretty big impact on the modern perception of the Illuminati. The Illuminatus trilogy.
Okay, I've heard of this. It's a series of novels from the 1970s, right?
Yep, written by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. It's this wild, satirical ride that blends real historical figures and events with fictional conspiracies and occult themes.
Sounds like it could be fuel for a conspiracy theorist fire.
It definitely was. The trilogy, while intended as satire, actually played a big role in popularizing the modern image of the Illuminati as this all-powerful, shadowy organization.
So it's a case of fiction blurring with reality and feeding into these conspiracy theories.
Exactly. And it shows how pop culture can both mock and reinforce these ideas, often at the same time.
It's a fascinating example of how these narratives can evolve and adapt over time.
Absolutely. It highlights the power of storytelling, even when it's presented as fiction, to shape our understanding of the world.
Well said. Okay, I think we've covered all the major bases here. We've explored the history, the symbols, the psychology, the pop culture influences. It's been a deep dive for sure.
It really has. And I hope it's given you, our listeners, some valuable insights into the world of the Hollywood Illuminati and the broader phenomenon of conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. Now let's wrap things up with a nice thought-provoking outro. So after spending all this time unpacking the Illuminati and their supposed grip on Hollywood, what's the big takeaway here? Is there really a secret society dictating what movies we watch and music we listen to?
You know, if we kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the real question isn't whether the Illuminati actually exists. It's more about why this idea resonates with so many people, why it's become such a cultural phenomenon.
You're saying it's more about understanding ourselves than uncovering some shadowy cabal?
Exactly. Remember how those experts pointed out that conspiracy theories often target those in positions of power. In Hollywood, it's these larger-than-life celebrities, these cultural icons who seem to have it all.
And these theories play into those deep-seated anxieties we have. Well, who's really in control? Especially in a world that feels increasingly complex and unpredictable.
Right. Hollywood has this incredible influence on our lives. It shapes our tastes, our values, even our understanding of the world. So it's understandable that people might wonder if there's something more going on behind the scenes, if someone's pulling the strings.
Okay, that makes sense. But isn't it kind of a leap to go from Hollywood is influential to Beyonce is secretly a lizard person? You know, those classic Illuminati tropes?
Of course. But that's where those misinterpretations, the cherry-picked evidence, the echo chambers of the internet all come into play. They create this kind of distorted reality where coincidences become proof and skepticism is seen as ignorance.
So while the belief itself might be irrational, the anxieties behind it are very real. People are looking for explanations, for someone to blame, for the things they don't like about the world.
And that raises an interesting question if people are searching for answers. For a sense of control in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming, what are some more constructive ways to address those concerns?
That is the million-dollar question.
I think it starts with fostering critical thinking skills, promoting media literacy, helping people understand how these narratives prey on our emotions and our desire for simple explanations.
It's about giving people the tools to navigate this sea of information, to separate fact from fiction, and to form their own informed opinions.
Exactly. But it's also about creating systems where people feel like they have a voice, that they're not just passive consumers of media, but active participants in shaping their world.
So empowering people not just with knowledge,
Yeah,
but with a sense of agency.
right. Because when people feel powerless, when they feel like they have no control over their lives, that's when conspiracy theories start to take hold.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
Yeah.
We've gone from the historical roots of the Illuminati to the psychology of belief, the role of the internet, and the power of pop culture. It's amazing how this one topic touches on so many aspects of our lives.
It really does. And it's a reminder that we're all susceptible to these kinds of narratives, that we all have biases and blind spots.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember?
I think it's this. The next time you encounter a conspiracy theory, any conspiracy theory, don't just dismiss it out of hand. Take a moment to consider why people might find it compelling. What anxieties or desires is it tapping into? What does it tell us about ourselves and the world we live in?
That's such a valuable insight. It's about looking beyond the surface, understanding the deeper forces at play.
And remember, questioning, exploring, seeking out different perspectives, those are all essential parts of being an informed and engaged citizen in today's world.
Couldn't agree more. So to sum it all up, the real Illuminati were a blip in history, nothing like the all-powerful force they're often made out to be.
Right, and the modern belief in their Hollywood takeover is this really fascinating blend of misinterpretations and confirmation bias and this very human need to find explanations, even if those explanations are more fiction than fact.
But as we've been talking about, the fact that so many people buy into this idea, or at least find it intriguing, says a lot about our relationship with power and the allure of secrets and the importance of critical thinking in a world that's just overflowing with information. So what are some of the most common anxieties or desires, do you think, that these theories tap into?
Well, we've touched on this a little bit already, but I think one of the biggest ones is this need for control, like especially in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable.
Right. It makes sense that people would want to believe that someone's in charge.
Exactly.
Even if it's a secret society with a sinister agenda.
Yeah. It's like saying, okay, the world might be a mess, but at least someone's steering the ship.
Right. And it's not just random events happening.
Exactly. And another big one is the desire for meaning and purpose.
Okay. How so?
Well, conspiracy theories often offer these grand narratives, these kind of overarching explanations for why things are the way they are. And they make you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, like you're in the know. You've got this secret knowledge that most people don't have.
Like you're part of this exclusive club.
Right. And that can be really appealing, especially for people who feel like they don't have a lot of power or influence in their own lives.
So it's not just about the theory itself. It's about the sense of belonging and community that comes with it.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these anxieties and desires, they're not inherently bad or irrational. I mean, it's natural to want to understand the world around us and to feel like we have some control over our own destinies.
Right. It's just that sometimes those desires can lead us down some pretty strange paths.
Yeah, exactly.
So what can we do about it? How do we address these underlying anxieties
Yeah.
without resorting to conspiracy theories?
Well, I think it starts with education, teaching people critical thinking skills, helping them develop a healthy sense of skepticism, and promoting media literacy so that people can better understand how information is produced and disseminated, and how to identify bias and manipulation.
It's like giving people the tools to navigate this information overload.
Right.
And to make their own informed decisions.
Exactly. But it's also about creating systems where people feel like they have a voice, that they're not just passive consumers of media, but active participants in shaping their world.
So empowering people not just with knowledge, but with a sense of agency.
Right. Because when people feel powerless, when they feel like they don't have any control over their lives, that's when they're most susceptible to these kinds of narratives.
It's like conspiracy theories thrive in environments of uncertainty and fear.
Exactly.
So if we want to combat them, we need to create a more just and equitable society where people feel heard and seen and valued.
I think that's a really important point. It's not just about debunking individual theories. It's about addressing the systemic issues that create the conditions for those theories to flourish.
So it's about creating a world where people have less need to resort to conspiracy thinking in the first place.
Exactly.
That's a great goal to strive for, but it's also a really big challenge.
Oh, for sure. It's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah.
And collaboration across a lot of different sectors.
Right. But I think it's a challenge worth taking on. Because the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah, they are. When people start to believe in these kinds of theories, it can have a really negative impact on their relationships, on their mental health, and even on their ability to function in society.
And it can erode trust in institutions and experts,
Right.
which makes it even harder to solve the problem.
That we're facing as a society.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is.
So what can we do as individuals?
Harry.
How can we help break this cycle?
Well, I think one of the most important things we can do is to be mindful of the information we consume and to be critical of the sources we trust.
Okay.
So do your research, check your facts,
Mm.
and don't be afraid to ask questions.
And don't just take things at face value.
Right. Especially if it comes from a source that you're not familiar with or that has a history of promoting misinformation.
And be wary of anything that seems too good to be true.
Exactly. If something sounds sensational or outlandish, it's probably a good idea to approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism.
So it's all about being a more informed and discerning consumer of information.
Absolutely. And it's also about being willing to have difficult conversations with people who hold different beliefs than you do.
Okay.
Don't just shut down the conversation or try to silence the other person. Instead, try to understand where they're coming from and why they believe what they believe.
So engage with them respectfully.
Right. Even if you disagree with them, you might not change their mind, but you might at least plant a seed of doubt or open them up to the possibility that there might be other ways of looking at the world.
And that's a start.
Yeah, it is.
You know, this conversation has really got me thinking about the power of narrative and how these stories that we tell ourselves about the world can shape our beliefs and our behaviors.
It's true. Narratives are incredibly powerful. They can be used for good or for evil.
Right. And I think it's important to be aware of the narratives that are being used to manipulate us,
Mhm.
whether it's through conspiracy theories or through more mainstream forms of propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be critical consumers of information, but we also need to be storytellers ourselves. We need to create our own narratives
Mm-hmm.
that are grounded in reality
Mm.
and that promote values of compassion and understanding.
I love that. We need to reclaim the power of narrative and use it to build a better world.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the psychology of conspiracy theories, the dangers they pose,
Mm.
and the importance of critical thinking and media literacy. Is there anything else we need to cover before we move on to the outro?
Well, there's one more piece of the puzzle that we haven't really addressed yet, and that's the role of the internet.
Ah, yes, the internet, the double-edged sword of our time.
Exactly. On the one hand, the internet has given us access to more information than ever before.
Right.
We can connect with people from all over the world, learn new things, and share our own ideas and perspectives.
So it's an amazing tool for communication and collaboration.
It really is. But on the other hand, the internet has also made it easier than ever to spread misinformation and propaganda.
Right. It's like a breeding ground for conspiracy theories.
Yeah, because anyone can create a website or a social media account and start sharing whatever they want, regardless of whether it's true or not.
And with the rise of social media,
It's become even easier for these false narratives to go viral and to reach a massive audience.
it's like the echo chamber effect on steroids.
Exactly, because social media algorithms are designed to show you content that you're likely to engage with.
Right.
So if you start clicking on links about conspiracy theories, you're going to see more and more of that content, and it's going to reinforce your existing beliefs.
So it's like a self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah, it can be really hard to break out of.
So what can we do about it? How do we combat misinformation on the internet?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted solution. We need to educate people about how to identify and evaluate information online.
Okay.
We need to hold social media platforms accountable for the content they host. And we need to support independent journalism and fact-checking organizations.
So basically, we need to be more critical consumers of information online.
Exactly. But we can't just believe everything we read. We need to think for ourselves. And we need to be willing to challenge our own biases.
So it's all about being more mindful and intentional.
Right. And about recognizing that the internet is just a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad.
So it's up to us to decide how we use it.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the history of the Illuminati, the psychology of conspiracy theories, the role of the internet, and the importance of critical thinking and media literacy. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It really has.
So before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the power of narrative. You said that we need to reclaim the power of narrative
Right.
and use it to build a better world. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think for too long, we've been letting other people tell us stories about the world, stories that are often based on fear and division. And I think it's time for us to start telling our own stories, stories that are based on hope and compassion, stories that celebrate our common humanity.
So it's about creating a new narrative.
Right, a narrative that's more inclusive,
Hmm.
more equitable, and more sustainable.
A narrative that reflects the world we want to live in.
Exactly.
I love that. That's a really powerful message.
And I think it's a message that we need to hear right now.
I agree. So as we wrap up this deep dive, Let's challenge ourselves to be more critical consumers of information, to be mindful of the narratives that are shaping our beliefs, and to create our own stories that promote understanding and compassion. Beautifully said. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, they're more fiction than fact. But like we said, even though it might sound crazy, the fact that so many people believe it, or at least think about it, says a lot about us, our relationship with power and secrets, and it shows how important critical thinking is these days.
Yeah.
When we're bombarded with so much info all the time.
It's like everyone's trying to figure out who's really calling the shots, right?
Totally.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to something as big as Hollywood.
Right, because it has such a huge impact on our culture. It shapes how we see the world.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. After this deep dive into the Illuminati and Hollywood, what's the big takeaway?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that the real Illuminati were nothing like the all-powerful group they're made out to be.
Right. They were around for like, what, a decade?
Yeah, something like that. And they were more about book clubs than controlling the world.
Okay, so why are people so obsessed with them then?
That's the million-dollar question. I think it comes down to a few things. First, there's this human need to make sense of the world.
Right. We want explanations for why things happen.
Especially when those things are bad or scary.
And when those explanations involve secret societies and conspiracies, it can be really tempting to believe them.
Yeah, because it makes you feel like you're in the know, like you have this secret knowledge that most people don't.
It's like a psychological comfort blanket almost.
Exactly. And then you add in the internet, which has made it so easy to spread misinformation.
Right. Anyone can post anything online these days.
Yeah.
And it can be really hard to tell what's true and what's not.
And social media algorithms are designed to show you content that confirms your existing beliefs.
So it's like an echo chamber.
Exactly. You just keep seeing the same information over and over again, and it reinforces your biases.
So it's a perfect storm for conspiracy theories to thrive.
It really is.
So what can we do about it?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be aware of our own biases.
Okay.
To question our assumptions.
Right, and to be critical of the information we consume.
Exactly. Don't just believe everything you read online. Do your research, check your facts, and be willing to change your mind if you're presented with new evidence.
So it's all about being more mindful and intentional about the way we interact with information.
Absolutely.
And it's about having the courage to challenge our own beliefs.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
Right, because that's how we grow and learn.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has.
We've covered a lot of ground today. From the history of the Illuminati, to the psychology of conspiracy theories, to the role of the internet in spreading misinformation.
And the importance of critical thinking.
Right. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought. The world is a complex place, and there are a lot of things we don't understand. But that doesn't mean we should resort to conspiracy theories to explain the unknown.
We can be curious. We can be skeptical. But we should always strive to be grounded in reality.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and until next time, keep your minds open and your tinfoil hats firmly in the closet.